Hey guys, welcome back. Danny Wu here again. So in this video we are going to continue on our pathway with APIs. This video is going to be a demo video. So we're going to be working with 3 different APIs today and demoing how they actually work and putting together 3 different projects based off of these APIs. The first one is Open Weather Map. So this API allows us to basically pull live weather data from their database for any particular location in the world. So we can get the current weather for San Diego, California, Brooklyn, New York, or London or Paris, for instance. The next API that we're going to be playing around with is the Mapbox API, which is a great platform that allows us to design our own maps and embed them onto our own websites, as well as doing some more data-driven interactive stuff with those maps, like plotting locations and dropping pins and having pop-ups when you click on those pins. And then the last API we're going to be playing around with is the Giphy API. Giphy is a great platform for querying any animated GIFs. And they have an API that allows us to pull in animated GIFs into our own websites as well. So we're going to be exploring all 3 of those APIs and going through the documentation that they provide, looking at the examples that they have available to us, and figuring out how to get this information, get this data onto our own websites. For this demo, we are going to be using glitch.com as our programming environment. So why don't you go ahead and go to glitch.com and create an account if you haven't already, or log into your own account. Once you're logged in, then we are going to go to a new project and click on Hello Web Page, which is just a basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript template. When you create a new project, it gives you a README, which we don't really care about. If you wanted to update this with the actual information around the project that you're creating, go for it. We're not going to do that in this demo. There is an HTML document, which is all of our HTML code. There is a JavaScript document, which is what we'll predominantly be working with today. And there's a CSS document for any sort of styles we want to apply to the HTML document. So the first thing we want to do is take a look at the Open Weather Map API documentation and figure out how to actually work with this API. Let's create a new tab or window, and we're going to go to openweathermap.org. So on this website, there are a few links at the top. There's Weather, Maps, Guide, and API. So we care pretty much entirely about the API documentation and how to work with their API. So let's click on that first. At the top, there's a paragraph that explains how we set up an API connection. So it says, please sign up and use our fast and easy to work with weather APIs for free. All of the APIs that we're going to be working with today are also free APIs, or at least tiered. There's a free option. We're just going to be using the free option for all of the APIs we're working with today. If you want to go beyond that, that's totally up to you. But for these examples, we're just going to be using the free options. So it says, read how to start first and enjoy using our powerful weather APIs. So let's click on how to start. That sounds like a good place to begin. So how to start in 3 simple steps. So step 1, sign up and get an API key. Step 2, start using the API for free. And if you need more features, then you can upgrade to monthly subscriptions. Really, all we need is step 1. So we need to sign up and create an API key. So I've already created an account, but for those of you who haven't, just go ahead and click on sign up and fill out this information here. Agree to all the terms and services. You are not a robot, and create an account. So I'm just going to sign in to my account. So once you're signed in, you should see this screen. So at the top, there's a secondary navigation. There's new products, services, API keys. So all we really care about is the API keys right now. So let's go ahead and click on API keys. Okay, so you should have a default API key here, and that's the one we're going to use. Make sure you use your own API keys and not the ones that I'm using in this demo, mainly because the API key only allows for a certain number of queries. So if we all use it, then it's probably just going to give us an error and say there's too many people using this API key. So it's best to use your own. So I am going to select the API key. I'm going to copy it. And then let's go back to our glitch.com account and our project. And let's go to the JavaScript document. And we could just delete everything in there. And I'm going to do a comment here, which is just 2 forward slashes in JavaScript. And I'm just going to say open weather map API key, and then paste that API key in our JavaScript document. So we are going to be referencing this API key multiple times in our code and while we're just kind of playing around with the API. So it's best to just have it easily accessible in a document. So that's why we added it to our JavaScript document. And if you comment it out, then it's just going to be ignored by the browser when you run this code. So we have our API key here. So let's go back to the Open Weather Map API documentation. So let's go back and then go to API again. And there's lots of options in the documentation here. So you can do a ton of stuff with this API. You can get the current weather data, the hourly forecasts. There's something called One Call API, which gives you a lot of information. There is 16-day daily forecasts. There's climate forecasts. There's 5-day, 3-hour forecasts. Then you can keep on going down, and there's historical data. There's actual maps that you can pull in. There's weather station information. So most of this is a part of the paid subscription model, but the current weather data, which is the data that we care about for this particular project, is part of the free option. So this is really all we care about at this point, is the current weather data. So let's go ahead and click on API doc. And this is more information about how to actually use this API, specifically when it comes to the current weather data. So if we scroll down, we could see that we can do a query by city name, which is great. So let's play around with that. So the API call would be api.openweathermap.org/data/2.5/weather ? Then Q equals is the query. So that's where we're going to pass in the city name. I find that it's best to use the city name, state, and country code just for accuracy. Otherwise, sometimes I get errors if I just do city name and state or just city name. So it's better to be as specific as possible. So after that, there's an ampersand, and API ID equals, and then your API key. So that's where we pass in the API key that we just copied and pasted into our document. So I'm going to double click on the last one, and I'm just going to copy that and create a new tab or a new window and paste it in that new window. So we need to change all the information that's in the curly brackets. So we need to change the city name, the state, country code, and we need to pass in your API key, so the API key that we just created. So let's go back to our JavaScript file and get that API key. Let's copy it, go back to that tab that we have open, and let's paste it into where it says your API key. Great, so we have our API key in there. And then we just need to change the city name, state, and country code. So I'm going to do Brooklyn, New York, NY, and USA. So once you have all your information in there, you can hit return. And you should see all the data nicely populated here. So yours might, actually most likely will, look like this, where it's just a string of information. So I would highly recommend, if you're using Chrome, to get a JSON formatter. So if you just Google Chrome JSON formatter. This is the one that I use and like. So it's JSON formatter, and you just install it onto Chrome. Once it's installed, then you can toggle between the raw view or a parsed view of the data. So the parsed view is basically just displaying it in a much nicer, easier to read, easier to navigate way. So we have the coordinates, which is the latitude and longitude of where this weather station lives. We have weather information, there's an ID in there. Main is just the type of weather it is. A description is a more descriptive version of main. And then there's an icon that goes along with that you could pull in as well. And then there's main, and that gives us the temperature, feels like, temp min, temp max, pressure, humidity, visibility, wind speed. There's clouds, how cloudy it is, system information, time zone, the name of the city, and an ID. So if you look at the temperature, so that doesn't look like it's Fahrenheit, doesn't look like it's Celsius. So let's go back to the documentation and try and figure out what is going on with that. So let's scroll down. Okay, so you can do it by city ID, geographic coordinates, zip code. Can change it between data formats, XML, JSON, etc. Yeah, XML, JSON, and HTML. Aha. So here is units format. So by default, it looks like the units are in Kelvin. So if you wanted to change that to metric or imperial, then you can add on another parameter called units and set that equal to metric or equal to imperial. So I am going to use imperial since we are in the United States. So I'm going to go back to this tab, and after Brooklyn, New York, USA, I'm going to add another ampersand and add in units. I believe it's units, and then imperial. Yeah. So if you add in units and imperial, in between the query, which is where we are pulling the weather from, the location, and the API key, we can change the data that we're getting back from Kelvin to imperial, which is in Fahrenheit. So now that looks more appropriate for Brooklyn, New York. It's 41 degrees Fahrenheit. It feels like 28 degrees Fahrenheit. That's crazy. We are in the middle of a storm right now, so I guess it's pretty windy and rainy. Great. So we have our data. It's populating when we go to the URL. So let's go ahead and copy that URL. So select it, copy it. Let's go back to our JavaScript file and glitch. And I'm just going to add this in as a comment. So we know that that's the URL that works, that where we can get our data from. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to get jQuery. So we haven't connected jQuery to our HTML document yet. So let's create a new tab and go to code.jquery.com. And this is the jQuery CDN, which basically allows us to link to their jQuery documents on their servers rather than downloading everything and hosting it on our servers. So I'm going to click on the minified version, and I'm going to copy this code, the script code. And let's go back to our glitch.com account and go back to the HTML file. And let's just paste that right after the metadata information. So we are going to be using the getJSON method in jQuery. So that's why we need to first link the jQuery library, the jQuery API, to our HTML document. So now that's linked, we can start playing around with it and start using that framework. While we're in here, let's just get rid of everything in body because we don't need any of that information. We're just going to start with an empty body and push data to the body from the JavaScript document. Okay, so let's go back to JavaScript. And the first thing we want to do for pretty much all of our JavaScript documents is to reference document ready. So what this does is waits until the HTML document is fully loaded. Once it's fully loaded, then we can run our JavaScript. Usually you are interacting with something in the HTML document in your JavaScript code as well. So it's better to have the entire document fully loaded before you actually run your JavaScript, because if you're running JavaScript as referencing something that isn't loaded yet, you're gonna get an error. So it's always good to use document.ready to make sure that the document is ready to run the JavaScript. So the first thing we're gonna do is create a new function. And I'm gonna call that function getWeather. In this function, I'm going to create a variable for my key, and I'm going to set that equal to the API key from OpenWeather. Then I'm going to create a variable for my location, and we can set that equal to, let's just do Brooklyn, New York, USA for now. And then I'm going to create a variable for my URL. And this is going to be the URL that we know works because we've tested it and pasted it in there. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to break up the string where the location is. So I'm going to delete the location, which is Brooklyn, New York, and break up the string by adding 2 quotes. So there's one string and then another string. And then what I'm going to do is add in the location variable here. So we're taking the location variable and applying it to, adding it to this URL string. So if we wanted to change location to, like, let's change it to Queens, New York instead. Then rather than changing it in this string, we could change it just in this variable, and it'll be applied to this URL string. So let's do the same thing for the API key. So I'm going to delete the API key in the URL string and just do plus key, which is the variable that we created up here. So now we have our URL variable that we can pass into our getJSON function. So again, we are going to be using getJSON, which is a jQuery method. So to reference jQuery, again, you can use the $. So the $, dot, and then getJSON. So using getJSON is very easy because all we have to do is pass in a URL to get JSON through that URL. And then once we get that JSON data, once we get that information, we can do something with it and pass it to the HTML document or print it out in the JavaScript console, whatever we want to do with it. So the first thing we want to pass in is the URL variable. And then we're going to run a function. And this function is going to pass in, let's just call it JSON. We could call it whatever we want. But this is basically the data that's going to get returned from this URL that we're querying. Again, this URL is the URL that we tested at the top. So we know it works. We know we can get data using that URL. So we know we should be getting something here. So the first thing to do for pretty much any project you're working on with APIs is to just console.log the data. So console.log is basically just going to print out that data into the console, the JavaScript console, so we can see if that data is actually coming in or if we're getting an error message of any kind. So we have the function. Now we just need to run the function. So we have to run it by referencing it. And that should be good. So I'm going to open this up in a new window. And I am going to go to the JavaScript console. So view, developer, and then JavaScript console. And see if we're getting any data in there. So it looks like we are. So where it says object, there's a little arrow next to it. If we open that up, then all of our data is in there. So again, it's for Queens, New York, which looks correct. The weather is based off of Fahrenheit, so that looks fairly accurate as well. So we're getting data in there, which is great. What data do we want to use? Let's say we want to pull out the temperature, and let's do, so let's pull out the feels like temperature, and let's also pull out the main data. So it says clouds. How we're going to do this is reference the object is the JSON object that we are pulling. And then to get to the weather object, we do JSON.weather. Because this is an array, we have to reference which one in the array, but there's only one in the array, so we're just referencing the first one, which is 0. So it's json.weather0.main to get clouds. To get the feels like temperature, use json.main.feelslike to get that value. Okay, so let's go back. So I'm going to do json.main first. And then, okay, so then we're getting the main. Then I want to do feels like. Dot feels like. Cool, so we're getting the feels like temperature in Fahrenheit. So that works. So let's do another console log. I'm going to do JSON dot weather 0. Let's do that first. Okay, so that's working. So now we just need to do .main. Okay, so it's 53.74 degrees Fahrenheit, feels like, and it's cloudy. Awesome. So now all we have to do is take those values and pass them to the body of the website. So to do that, we are going to use jQuery again. And we're going to reference the body. And I'm going to append some HTML. So I am going to write out the entire string of HTML, just static information for now, and then I'm going to replace that information with something dynamic that we're pulling in from the API. So let's do an H1, and I'm going to pull in the location name. So let's just write location name here first. So this is just temporary, we're going to change that. Then I'm going to do a P for the temperature. Let's call it feels like. Feels like temp. Then I'm going to do another paragraph for description. Okay, so let's see if that just works first. Great. So we have location name, feels like temp, and description. Awesome. So now we want to pass in the actual values that we're getting from the API call over here. So to do that, rather than doing location name static and feels like static and description static, we can do what we did up here with the URL and break this string and just add in dynamic information. So the first thing, let's do location, the location variable. Then feels like temp. Let's actually use this and as a title. Then break up the string again and say, okay, feels like temp is going to be json.main.feelslike. json.main.feelslike. And then description, we could do the same thing here too. Let's just use that as a title. And it's going to be json.weather 0 in the array .main. Okay, let's try and clean this up. Yeah, that looks nice. So now we should, when we go back to window, it's Queens, New York, USA, feels like 53.75, and the description is clouds. It's great. Awesome. So if we were to change this to, I don't know, let's try San Diego, California, and go back, and everything changes. San Diego, 55.13, and it's also cloudy there. So feel free to change this to any city or town in the United States or elsewhere in the world. Awesome. So that is the example for getting weather data from the Open Weather Map API. So the next example we're going to be playing around with is the Mapbox API. So for this example, we are going to be basically creating a basic Mapbox map and putting it on our website. So let's go to mapbox.com. And the first thing we want to do is create an account. So let's go ahead and sign in. If you don't have a Mapbox account, go ahead and sign up for a Mapbox account. Again, everything we're doing in any of these demos are using APIs that are 100% free, so you don't have to put in any credit card information or pay for anything. So I already have an account, so I'm just going to log into my Mapbox account. So once you're logged into your account, it sends you to your account dashboard. So on the account dashboard, there are a couple different options here. You can start by designing a map. So one great thing about Mapbox is it allows you to design and customize your own maps. And then there is another option for installing these maps using their SDKs. An SDK stands for Software Development Kit, which can be similar to APIs, but they can be also more advanced. So for the SDK for Mapbox, there is a JavaScript one, there's an iOS one, Android, and Unity. So we are going to be using the JavaScript one for the web. So go ahead and click on the web SDK example. So there are two different options. There is use Mapbox CDN and use a modular bundler, but we aren't going to be using that. That's more for backend development. We just care about the simple HTML CDN link. So let's click on use the Mapbox CDN. First thing you want to do is copy and paste the JavaScript files and the CSS files that are created for this API connection. So let's select that and you can copy it. And then let's go back to glitch.com and let's create a new project. And again, it's just going to be a very basic web page. And these are JavaScript files and CSS files, so we're going to go to our HTML document and paste those in there. So we have a link to the Mapbox JavaScript file and the Mapbox CSS file. Great. So let's go back to Mapbox and let's click on Next. So here is some HTML code and then some JavaScript code. So let's copy first the HTML code. So this is a div with an ID of map and has some style to it as well. So let's copy that, go back to our HTML, and let's replace what's currently there, delete that in the body, and paste that Mapbox div into our body in the HTML document. Let's go back, and there's some JavaScript here. So we don't need the script, the open and close tag. We're just going to copy the JavaScript that's inside of the script open and close tag. Let's copy, go back, go to our JavaScript file, and paste that into our JavaScript file. So this is nice because it gives you everything you possibly need to get started with creating a map and embedding it onto your own website. So this is our access token, which is kind of like our API key. Again, please use your own. This is the map variable that's creating a new map object. And that map is referencing the container, so where that map lives, which is referencing the ID of map. So if you look at the HTML, it has an ID of map. So we're referencing that ID to pass in a new Mapbox map into that div. Well, with Mapbox, there's a ton of different map styles that you can select. So this is just the style that comes when you do this setup, essentially. So let's go back, hit next, and that's it. So let's go and check out what we've done. So let's show this in a new window. And we got a map. Looks great. So you can click and drag. It's pretty awesome. So if we wanted to make this more specific and more customized, then we can do that as well. So with the map object in Mapbox, we can pass in a few other parameters. We could pass in like a center point, so where the map is loading, what part of the world the map is loading on. We can pass in a zoom as well. And then we could also do some other stuff like adding markers and pop-ups, etc. So we need to get jQuery as well, because we're going to be playing around with jQuery. So again, let's go to code.jquery.com. Click on the minified version. Just like what we did before, copy it. Go to our JavaScript, and I'm going to paste it right after the meta information. Okay, so now we've linked jQuery. Now we can start using it. So I'm going to use that to do a document.ready. So we know that our HTML document is fully loaded. And then we can run through that JavaScript code. All right. So in here, I'm going to create a new variable. And I am going to pass in the latitude and longitude for Queens College. So for this, it has to be an array of values. It's only going to be 2 values. So to find the latitude and longitude points, you can go to Google Maps. And let's type in Queens College. Then if you do a right click anywhere in Google Maps, you can select what's here. And that'll tell you what's there, plus the latitude and longitude points. I think longitude goes first, so I'm going to copy that. It's negative that number. And latitude, I could have these backwards, but we'll try that first. So we have our array for the Queens College location for the latitude and longitude. Then we could pass that latitude and longitude value into the Mapbox object. So it'll load at the center of where Queens College is. So if you wanted to, you could just pass in this array of values here, but it's always nice to have a variable. So let's check that out and see if that works. Okay, so it looks like it might have worked. That's Queens over in this area, but it's really far away. So another parameter that we could pass in is zoom. So let's pass in zoom, and let's say 12. So I think the higher the number, the closer you're going to be. Great. So there's Queens College in the middle of this map, and we're up close and personal. So if we go back to Mapbox, after the congratulations, it also gives us a bunch of examples. So there's a display a pop-up on click example, there's adding control examples, there's style animations, which is kind of nice. You can check out different map styles. Actually, I'm gonna open that one real quick. So we can see street, we can see light, which is I think the one that we're using, dark, there's outdoors, and then satellite. So if you scroll down here, you could take a look at all the different options. And it's basically toggling between these IDs, I believe. So we are using streets -V11. But if we wanted to do, let's try satellite V9 instead. Let's just copy that and replace it here. And then we get a satellite view, which is kind of cool. Let's try the dark V10. So there's lots of different options here for depending on how you want this map to look. So just explore and play around with it and see what works for you. Cool. So another option is displaying a pop-up on click. So when you click on a pin, it'll pop up some information, which is kind of nice. So why don't we go ahead and do that as well. So after creating the new map object, you can create a new variable for a marker. Set that equal to new Mapbox gl.marker. And then there's a number of different methods that we can pass in here. So there is set longitude and latitude. So that's where this marker is going to live, essentially. And let's use the same location. Let's do Queens College, the variable we created. See if that worked. Not yet. So we also need to add it to the map. So add to map. All right, let's take a look. And there we go. We have a marker in the middle where Queens College is. Click and drag that around, it stays there. But there's no pop-up on click. So let's create a variable for our pop-up. Set that equal to new Mapbox gl.popup. So this allows for a couple methods as well. Set text. And we can pass in some text here. Hello from Queens College. So we've created this pop-up, but we need to apply it to the marker. So we're going to apply it to the marker as well. And set pop up to be pop-up. All right, let's check it out. Click, hey, and we get the pop-up. So that is a very basic Mapbox map that allows us to put in a marker, pin, and allows us to interact with it. On click, we can get a little pop-up message here. So there's lots and lots and lots of other things you could do with Mapbox. That was just a very brief overview. So if you look at any of these examples, you can kind of scroll through this and see what is in there. And if you scroll down, all the code is right there for you. So you can just reference all the code that is in here and use it for the project that you're working on. Awesome. There is another example where I will link to on YouTube and on our class website that basically combines both the Mapbox example and the open weather map example. So this is the Mapbox map, and I am querying data from open weather map. So when you click on this marker, it tells you where this location is, the degrees in Fahrenheit, and the weather, if it's raining or not, or cloudy, etc. So this is using both Mapbox and Open Weather Map API. So that's another example that you can look at and explore and play around with, but it just is a good example that shows you that you can combine multiple APIs together to make something a lot more robust and interesting. Okay, so let's go to glitch.com again, and let's create one last project. Again, it's just going to be a basic web page. And for this example, we are going to be using Giphy.com's API. So let's go ahead and go to Giphy.com. This is a great site for animated GIFs, animated GIFs, however you want to pronounce it. If we hover over this little drop-down menu, there is a section called Developers. So this section is all about the API information, how to actually work with it. So let's click on Developers, click on Get Started, and we can create a new account. So let's go ahead and log in. So if you don't have an account, you can go to Join Giphy and create one. I do have an account, so I'm just going to log into my Giphy account. And then once you're logged in, it sends you to your dashboard where it has all your apps. So we're going to go and create a new app. So there's two options. There's the SDK option, which is much more robust, but it's also much more complicated. And then the API option, which is much easier to use and kind of user-friendly. So we're going to go ahead and use the API option. So let's select API, hit Next Steps, and give it a name, and call it Info Design API Example. Description, Info Design API Example. Create an app. And then we have our API key. So let's copy that. Go back to our new document, delete all this JavaScript, and again, say Giphy API key, so we have it easily accessible. So let's go back to the Giphy developer information, and let's go to docs. So this is, again, all the documentation when it comes to working with the Giphy API. We are going to check out the API information. So this API Quick Start Guide. So we created our app, and we are going to look at the different endpoints that we could use. So there is a search endpoint where you can search using a keyword or phrase or term. So that seems promising. And that returns a limit of 20, a maximum of 25 objects, it looks like. That's fine. You can also do trending endpoints, so what's currently trending. Translate endpoints, because there's a lot of different endpoints that you could, random endpoints, so you can do a randomly generated animated GIF. So we're going to be using the search endpoint. So let's go ahead and copy that endpoint. And let's go back and do a comment and paste that endpoint into our JavaScript document. So let's go ahead and why don't we just test this by pasting this into a browser window. And the first thing we need to pass in is an API key. So that'll be our API key that we created up here. And then we're going to do and query q equals the query. So we can do data. And then there's a couple other parameters we could pass in. So and can limit this. Say we only want 25. And we can do an offset. So we could offset this by 0, so we're not going to have any offset. And since this could be potentially used by children, we can also add a rating. Let's just do a G rating. We can also add a language. And let's do English. EN. Okay. So let's hit return. Aha. So again, you might see something that looks like this. If you do, then you probably want to get a JSON formatter for Chrome or the browser that you're using this in. So we can parse this out so it's a lot cleaner and easier to navigate. So this gives us our data, which then is also a data array. So each of these objects in the array are a new animated GIF. So we can look at some of these and say, okay, let's take a look at the original. Cool. Looks good. So there's a lot of information around one animated GIF. There's the type, which is GIF. There's an ID, there's a URL, slug, bit.ly, link, username, source, title, yada, yada, yada. Lots of stuff. There's the images, and there's lots of options for images. There's HD, downsized, small, and then the original. And there's much, much more. There's analytics information around it as well. And then it gets to the next GIF. So each one of these are just one GIF and all the data around it. Okay, so that's working. So let's go ahead and copy that URL. And let's add it here as well. And we're basically going to do the same thing we did with the weather API. But in this example, we're actually going to make it a little bit more interactive and add a search bar feature for the user to type in keywords and search for something that they want to specifically find. So let's go ahead and go to our HTML and let's delete everything that's in body. The only thing that I'm going to add in there is an input field and a main element for loading in all these animated GIFs. So I'm going to add an input and I'm going to give that an ID of search. I'm going to give it a type. It's going to be text. Oops, that should be in quotes. A name, call that search as well. Placeholder. Search GIFs. And then I'm going to add a main element. And this is where we're going to load in all of our animated GIFs that we're pulling from Giphy's API. Okay, let's check that out. Cool. So we got a little search field to work with. We also need to add our jQuery. So I'm going to go to code.jquery.com again, get the minified code for jQuery again, and then paste that into our HTML below the metadata. All right, so now we have our jQuery in there as well, so we can start using the jQuery methods and elements in there. So for that in our JavaScript document, let's first do a document.ready function. And let's create a function called getGIFs. And we are going to pass in a value here. So that's the value that the user is going to type into the search field. It's going to be passed into this function, and we can apply that to the API call that we are using to get data from Giphy's API. I am going to also reference the search ID that we created for the input field. And in jQuery, there is a key press method, and we could say function pass in E, which is the event. And we're going to say, add a little if statement here. So if something, then we are going to run the getGIFs function. So if e.which is equal to 13, this is basically saying, okay, if return is pressed, then we're going to run through this code. So 13 is the key code for return on the keyboard. So I am going to add a remove function to the main HTML element that we created for all the divs inside that. Because if we don't do that, then it's just going to constantly add more and more and more onto the end of these images, onto the ends of these GIFs. And then we're going to reference the getGIFs function. And we are going to pass in the value that is in the search field. So we can test this by just saying, okay, console.log value. Okay, let's go here and say, okay, test, hit return, and we get test here. Great, so it's working. That is awesome. Okay, so now we basically want to do what we did with the weather API, create a variable for our key, set that equal to the key that we created up here. Create a variable for our URL, set that equal to the URL we have here. And we're going to break up this URL by saying, okay, the key is going to be just this key. And the query here, instead of data, we're going to break that up. Say it's going to be the value that we're passing in that's coming from the search field. So we can format this. So a little easier to see and read. Now all we have to do is do the get JSON function, pass in the URL variable that we created, then have a function where we're going to pass in the JSON. Again, that could be called data or JSON or info or whatever you want it to be. It's just like kind of like a variable name. And the first thing we are going to do is just console log JSON. Okay. And then let's go back and test it. Let's do school. Okay, so we're getting an error. Got it. So it looks like we are using HTTPS for glitch, but for our Giphy query, we're using just HTTP. So that should be an easy fix. Instead of doing HTTP here, we want to do HTTPS. Hopefully that'll work. Let's go back and try it again. School. Yes, so that worked. So now we're printing out school, but we're also printing out the data. So if we look in here, we have data, pagination, and metadata. Data is really all we care about. These are all the animated GIFs, all 25 of them. And we can look in each one. It gives us all the information around the GIF. The images is what we really care about. But let's do downsized large. And this is the URL that is where the GIF lives. So that's basically what we want. All right, so let's go back and say, okay, so we want to go JSON.data, and then there's an array. So I'm going to do data 0 just so we can get 1, then dot images. And so let's just do this in console log first. So JSON.data. Let's do one step at a time. And let's do test. Okay, so now we have an array of our animated GIFs. Then we can go into each one of these individually. Let's just do the first one for now. So then brackets and 0. Let's do test. Cool. So this is just 1. Then we want to go to images. Dot images. And go back and test again. It's always good to go back and forth just to make sure that everything's working properly. Great. Then let's do downsized large. Dot downsized underscore large. Test. Awesome. And then dot URL. Dot URL. Test. Great. So we got the URL. Let's see what this is. Awesome. Looks good. Okay. So that works. So we're getting an image. So that's basically what we want to do for all of them. Let's just, for now, let's just add this to the main as 1. Main, which is again the HTML element that we created. Append. Then I'm going to append it as a div. And let's give it style, and we're going to add this to the background. Oops. Background image URL plus and let's create var image and set that equal to this JSON string, say image, and then finish the HTML. Okay. All right, let's try that out and see if it works. Test. Nothing's showing up, but I think that's because we don't have any CSS for our div. So let's go to our CSS and let's say, okay, div equals position relative. Let's give it a width. Let's just do 100 pixels by 100 pixels. Height, 100 pixels. Let's add some background. Position, center, background, size, be cover, and background, repeat, no repeat. Okay, let's see if that works. That's there. Something's not showing up properly. Okay, so let's go back to our JavaScript, and I think it's an issue with this string. There we go. There was an issue with the string, so it's just a little issue with where the quotes were placed in the string, but it seems to be working now. So if we do this and let's try data, then it'll override what was currently there. Let's try school with a new one. Let's try homework. Awesome. All right, so what if we wanted to view all of them? Then all we have to do is do a for loop. Var I equals 0. I is less than JSON.data.length I plus plus. Okay, and then we're going to put all this into this for loop. And instead of doing 0 here, we're going to be replacing that with I. So it's going to loop through all 25 of these images and display all 25. It should anyway. Hopefully it works. Okay, let's try test. Awesome. Let's try data. Looks good. So now, I mean, we have some issues when it comes to the style, but that's something that you could play around with on your own. I guess we could do, let's just do float left for the divs, see if that helps. Okay, so now it's at least floating left rather than just stacked on top of each other. So I have another example that I will share with you on the class website and on YouTube that will link to one that has more like style to it. That'll look a little bit better. So here it is. Just search for, say, code. Then it's just in a nicer format, but it's basically the same. So there is another example that uses Giphy's API in an interesting way that, again, I will share with you and link for you on the YouTube channel as well as the class website. But this is basically taking the assignment from last week, which was to create an interesting clock and apply it to this Giphy API query. So essentially what's going on is at the top is hours, this is minutes, and this is seconds. And every hour, minute, and second, I am querying the API for Giphy and pulling in a new animated GIF that uses that number. So this is an 8. To query Giphy's API and pull an image that relates to that number. So this is a Giphy clock, essentially. So again, I'll share that link with you guys so you can check it out. Okay, so I think that's basically it. Again, all of the code will be linked to the class website and the YouTube channel, so feel free to check those out if any of this was unclear, so you can look at the actual code that I created during these demos. And like always, feel free to message me on Slack, email me, or add a comment to the YouTube channel if you have any questions or if you have any suggestions or comments. I definitely always welcome those. So thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next video.